Howdy, and welcome back to another installment of Dead Franchises. Last we left off on this segment, I talked about the non-verbal fuck you itself, F-Zero, and I concluded that yeah, it's old as shit. The visuals haven't aged very well, the car selection is lacking, the controls aren't great because a D-pad is not a viable input method for a racing game, and the tracks are good, but the order of them was really weird, like White Land 1 was immediately followed up by White Land 2. The only reason why anyone would go back to this now is to see where the series got its start. I think it should be respected for what it did, but it shouldn't really be anyone's first outing with the series. But all of these problems could be easily fixed with a great sequel, especially since later in the Super Nintendo's life, developers had a better understanding of the system, and it was even capable of running 3D games. And make a sequel they did. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to introduce F-Zero's successor.
Broadcast Satellite F-Zero Grand Prix.
Oh, that is a mouthful.
This is a sequel to F-Zero in the same vein as this Call of Duty being a sequel to this Call of Duty. The gameplay, the visuals, they're all the exact same, with the biggest difference being a new selection of cars and newer, harder variations of every track. It's not terrible, but this game still has all of the underlying issues the first game had. Let's face it, the D-pad is the worst possible input method for a racing game, and the car selection is still really lacking, though I do prefer these designs over the originals. Furthermore, for a sequel, there is a lot more old than new. There's 2 new track themes, Forest and Metal Fort, but the rest of the tracks are just variations on older themes, and by this point in time, the visuals were nothing special since there were better looking games out, and there's still no multiplayer. What F-Zero truly needed was a sequel made from the ground up with more tracks, cars, things to unlock, and above all else, multiplayer. And it would finally get all of this with Nintendo's first truly 3D console, the Nintendo 64. In 1996, while still developing Mario Kart 64, Shigeru Miyamoto was thinking about the possibility of a new F-Zero game for the Nintendo 64. Production of the game began the next year, with the project being titled F-Zero 64.
Wow, what an original name! Huh.
The game was shown off in Nintendo's Space World event in mid-1997, and it featured large detailed cars and holy shit, the track's a loop! Yeah, anybody with eyes could tell that Nintendo was taking advantage of the hardware the game was on. Not too long after Space World, IGN put out an article saying that the game ran at a consistent 60 frames per second. Concerning that back then the only thing consistent in video games was shit voice acting, this was actually kind of impressive for the time.
F-Zero 64 was shaping up to be the sequel that fans could really enjoy, so I'm pretty sure that the wait wasn't too unbearable.
F-Zero X was released first in Japan on July 14th, 1998, then saw a release in the US on October 26th, and finally reached Europe on November 6th.
In F-Zero, the first thing that greeted you was an upbeat song and an admittedly bare-bones title screen. It did the job, but I think it could have been more. A title screen is your first impression of a video game. It tells you exactly what you're getting yourself into, so just how did F-Zero X improve upon this?
I feel like the living embodiment of the 90s came to my house and started screaming at my front door. The soundtrack is amazing and fits the vibe of the game perfectly, but a good soundtrack doesn't make a good game. So how well does the game play compared to the original? Well, if you were to compare the first game to X, then F-Zero would look like this.
I'm going the speed limit.
While F-Zero X would look like this. X feels much faster compared to its predecessor, and it's all thanks to a decision Nintendo made that I think was a pretty good call.
But we'll talk about graphics later. For now, let's talk about the controls.
These controls, oh my god, where do I begin? Well, first off, it's amazing how just a simple change like the input method can have on the overall enjoyment you can garner from a video game. This feels so good compared to the first game, where the cars just kind of snap in a direction, resulting in me making multiple corrections just to get the car to go straight. I don't have to worry about that here. The control is perfectly responsive and really good. Do you know what that means? It means if I fail hard, then I can just blame it on a faulty controller instead. But what's a good sequel without a few new moves to pull off? In addition to turning and drifting, you can also just straight up attack other cars. You can perform these moves by double tapping Z or R, and there's also a spin attack performed by holding Z and double tapping R, or vice versa, which is a great move to just run people off the road. There are more moves that a skill player can perform to get around the track much faster, but I am not good enough to pull these off.
Yeah, I'm worthless.
Overall, these controls feel so good to a point where I don't see why anyone would willingly go back to the original game after experiencing this. But what about all those Larry loners out there? Well, don't worry guys, because F-Zero X has got you covered with actual things to unlock. There's 2 unlockable cups, an unlockable difficulty, and a whopping 24 cars for you to get.
Homina, 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 huh?
The unlockables are probably my favorite part about F-Zero X, solely for the fact that this game handles them perfectly in my opinion. Basically, the game wants you to play each cup on each difficulty, getting first place overall to unlock everything, and every time you do this, you get 1 of 3 X marks. But here's the kicker. If you complete a cup on the expert difficulty, you automatically get the marks for novice and standard. Take that, you maniacal f***! The only issue with the unlockables is there's not a ton of them, and it doesn't take long to meet all the requirements, but this did save the game from having the player complete tedious tasks like play 400 races to unlock Mr. Ed. Speaking of the cars, I'm just gonna say it now. I love the art style. It's mostly because of the character portraits. Their designs just complement their respective cars really well. They just give these cars more personality, and then you end up picking out your favorite one more easily. Some of my favorites include the Red Gazelle, Sonic Phantom, Blue Falcon, Bloodhawk, Little Wyvern, and Great Star. Much like the first game, every car has stats showing a player how it will perform, with said stats being split up into 3 categories. Body boost and grip, with A being the best and E being just terrible. The previous game had all 4 cars perform differently, but at the end of the day, there were only 4 options and the differences were very slight. Since F-Zero X has 30 cars to choose from that all handle completely differently, then you're bound to find at least a small handful of cars that suit your playstyle. You can even adjust the acceleration of these vehicles before a race. Do you want to have good acceleration at the cost of the car never reaching its max speed, or do you want the car to go as fast as possible, sacrificing acceleration? It'll take some experimenting to find where you're comfortable, but I can see where someone might see this as a bit repetitive, though for me personally, this is a welcome addition. Also, you can change the color of your car. It does absolutely nothing, but I think it's neat.
But what would a racing game be without some good tracks? Shit! Luckily, F-Zero X has nothing but high-quality tracks, so let's go through the first 3 cups and I'll give my opinion on each one.
Mute City. It's a tradition in these games to start on a variation of this track. This is the perfect track to start off with. It lets you get a handle on the controls, and it's pretty fun. Next track on our list is Silence. This track is great because it's all about the speed here. No turns or corners that get in your way, just go, go, go. Sand Ocean. This track has you driving in a pipe, and I love it. Devil's Forest. There's a ton of sharp turns here, so do yourself a favor and learn how to drift. Big Blue. This track has you driving on a pipe, and I hate it. Too many close calls. Too many close calls. Port Town. It's fucking Port Town. Moving on to the Queen Cup, we start off with Sector A. One of my favorite tracks in the game. You can go upside down. That's cool. Red Canyon's got this cool jump. Yeah, that's it. Devil's Forest 2, the long-awaited sequel. It has these ramps you can shoot off of for more speed, and yep, that's it. That's why I deserve the number 2. Mute City 2, the underwhelming sequel. This track just wasn't doing it for me. It didn't really up the challenge from the first Mute City. Big Blue 2, the sequel nobody asked for. It doesn't really do anything all that interesting, it's just a solid standard track, but I like this one only because it's where I found out murdering someone gives you a gold star and a little chime like, good job, sport. White Lamp makes his triumphant return, and it is easily the hardest track the Queen Cup has to offer. There's loops, jumps, and boost pads up the wazoo, and it is the track that made me look up whether or not you can overdose on adrenaline. Firefield. I like this one. It's got a huge jump that's great for getting a ton of speed, and the overall design is really solid. Silence 2. It lacks the speed of the first variation, which is kind of a bummer, but makes up for that with death. Sector B. It's a variation on Sector A, and I kind of prefer this one. It's not all that different from Sector A, it just adds more obstacles, making this one a little more interesting. Red Canyon 2. This track is prime for murder, so spin, 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 and rack up that kill count. We all need a little more white land in our lives, and thankfully F-Zero X delivers. This one is primarily made up of a half pipe where I had more than one close call, though you could totally knock other cars off the track here. Mute City 3. Thank God this one came out. I was dying to see how the story concluded. Unlike Mute City 2, this track actually ups the difficulty by adding more sharp turns and ramps, making this track a great way to end the King Cup because it's both fun and challenging.
But of course this isn't all the cups and tracks that the game has to offer. There's also the 2 unlockable cups, and son of a bitch, it's bleeding over!
This cup is a joke. That's not me scoffing at it, this cup is actually hilarious. Rainbow Road from Mario Kart 64 is in the game, and it surprisingly works really well here. Also, big hand! It's a giant track in the shape of a hand, what's not to love? Now, the X Cup is by far the most interesting. Instead of having a set track list, this cup has randomly generated tracks which have varying degrees of difficulty. Though because of this, you can't actually select it in time trials.
So that's all the cups in the game, and overall, it's pretty good. You can really tell that Nintendo learned from their previous outings with the racing genre. They really nailed the track design here, and the order of the tracks is vastly superior from the previous game. But by now I'm pretty sure you've noticed that these graphics, they're definitely in 3D.
If we take a look at the beta of the game, the cars are much larger and more detailed than the final, but at the cost of having a lower frame rate. The main appeal of F-Zero, at least for me, is the fast-paced action that never lets up. I feel like if Nintendo went with the larger character models and lower frame rate, then I don't think this game would be remembered as fondly as it is today. It could have been riddled with slowdowns since there's so many cars on screen and the game's trying to render them all at once, and the player might not be able to see anything from the sides because the cars take up so much screen. Sure, this looks technically worse, but it plays better, and I'll take better gameplay over graphics any day. All the cars are bright, colorful, and have a ton of character added to them thanks to the aforementioned character portraits. The tracks, on the other hand?
I mean, if you squint a little bit, it might actually look like a road.
The cars may look fine, but the tracks are definitely the biggest downside to lowering the polygon count. They may lack detail, but the Spectacle True 3D offers, I think, more than makes up for it. The original game's tracks felt more like normal roads. You could take out these futuristic looking cars and replace them with real ones and they wouldn't seem too out of place. Here the tracks twist, turn, and loop around all over the place. In some you can even see the other end of the track directly above you. Every track is just fun to race on for this reason. Seeing them all do this crazy stuff is just as eye-catching as detailed graphics, and the fact that the game doesn't slow down at all despite having 30 cars on screen is still pretty impressive for the hardware.
And that's F-Zero X. Overall, I'd like to think that the game pushed the series in a nice direction. It adds great unlockables like extra cups, difficulties, and a truckload of new cars to choose from, as well as improving the gameplay by giving the player added mobility. But the one thing that it added that I love the most is the multiplayer. At 4-player split screen, the game doesn't even slow down, like this thing just never lets up, and it's super fun. Sure, the game isn't as accessible as Mario Kart, but who cares, it's still a blast. The game is fantastic and is stupid fun. There's no reason why you shouldn't not have this game in your collection, but what if you wanted more?
F-Zero X got an expansion on the N64DD that added a track editor, a car creator, and even souped up versions of all 30 cars in the game.
This is amazing!
However, the N64DD was only released in Japan, so this expansion never came to the US.
What the heck? That's a bigger dick move than the name for the fear of long words!
So what was your biggest fear again?
I've been telling you this for weeks, long words.
Oh, mine's fucking taxes. Hate those bitches. But enough about me. You have this.
Put that thing away, please. Don't show
That'll be
me.
$20,
This is
please.
helping me. This is not helping. Please help. No, please stop. Put it away.